Welcome to EV Challenge 101. This is your real basic introductory video that's just going to show you kind of big picture where we're going and what are some of the parts that you're going to be working with and some of the tricks that I've learned over the years on how to make this process a little bit simpler. Very first, let's talk storage. So I like to use plastic bins. For many years I used shoe boxes and they work. They're fine. The problem with shoe boxes is that you have to go, first of all, to a shoebox place every couple of years because the other ones get broken down and they get beat up, and they're all different sizes. That's the other problem. And so you have like one that's this wide and one that's this wide, and trying to figure out how to get that all into shelving, it's kind of annoying. I went to these cheap shoebox from Sterilite, and they're uniform and they're perfect. They are awesome. You can see into the bin, so you can tell if there's a car in there, if there's a battery pack in there, because sometimes you're loaning out battery packs and then somebody keeps it and it's inside their bin. You can quickly find it. I love it. And then I just have students label the top and the front of it so that I know whose bins is whose. So strongly recommend getting that. The very first thing you're going to need to do is to work with the chassis. So the chassis is the body of the car. It's what everything gets attached to. And you have three options. You have kind of what I consider to be the standard, which is a 1/4 inch thick balsa wood. And you get them in these long boards. They're about 3 feet long, 3 to 4 feet long. You have a 1/8 inch version, so half that thickness. And then you have a foam core version, which is probably, I don't know, 3/8, something like that. All of them have their advantages and disadvantages, and you get to choose which one you want to work with, and you'll also get to choose which ones your students can choose from. I strongly recommend for your first year to just use the 1/4 inch balsa wood. That way everything's consistent. You are getting used to how this material works. This is it's far stronger actually than this material here. This is lighter, but it's also twisty, it's bendy. And some people swear by it, but I find that I have some inconsistencies that can happen with cars. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. Recommend the 1/4 inch balsa wood. The reason why the foam core, I don't like it quite as much, is that when you glue something to the foam board itself, and let's say you have to take that off, move something, you tend to rip the paper. And then once you rip the paper, it's harder for it to glue, and then it just starts to get beat up a little faster. Whereas with this, you can kind of scrape off things that you don't need. So, my recommendation for first one, but you do you. You can do whatever you want. Now, like I said, you're gonna get them into long boards, but you don't wanna give the students these long boards. For years, I did have students cut their own boards. Don't recommend it. It's time consuming. It's harder than it looks. And I never had an accident with using a knife, but it is possible that somebody could cut themselves. It's just one more thing you could do to hurt yourself. You could use a saw instead. These little coping saws are okay. A hand saw is better, but you may not have a hand saw, and that's not provided for you. So the best solution, the absolute best thing you can do, is to tape them up, put tape around the outside. Find somebody with a shop at home. One of your teachers in your building has a shop at home with a chop saw, one of these like saws, or a bandsaw, even better, which is, just ask, do you have a bandsaw? Do you have a chop saw? And then if you tape together 5 to 8 at a time, it'll be about a stack like this. And you just tell them, I want them cut at this length. And then you just cut through it, go to the next one, cut through it, and all your boards are nice and even and they're cut like that. Because using this to cut however many groups you're gonna have, let's say you're gonna have 30 groups, is gonna just give you blisters, and it's gonna take a lot of time. So try to find somebody who has a saw for that. So how do you know what length to give them? You could say to students, you can pick your length. I don't recommend that. I recommend having a maximum length, and that maximum length should be the width of the bottom of this box. That way, when you cut one, it'll fit inside the box. So if I take this and I measure it, it's coming out at about 28 centimeters or so. It is science class, we use metric. 28 centimeters. And so then let me just cut this one. And then I use the T-square. Once I've marked my length, there it is. Use my T-square on here. Do a little cross there just so I can see the full line that goes all the way across. I actually keep using if I'm going to use a knife, then I'll keep using this as a guide when I'm cutting. Okay. So line the T-square up, and it will take several passes to get through this, and a little bit of pressure. And then once you're most of the way through, I don't know if you can see this on the camera or not, but there's like a little slice line through there. Then you can, see, but that can happen. See how I did that? I bet, you know what would be cooler is if I did this first, have this as like a breaker board, and then you can do that. Not super pretty though, right? This is gonna be kind of a rough edge. Students will have to shave it down, file it down, sand it down, whatever. That's why the big saw, so much nicer. But now the board fits in here perfectly. If students want to cut it down shorter, that's fine, but now you know that everyone's gonna fit inside of these boxes. If you have somebody with a chop saw or a bandsaw, you're probably gonna have to give the dimensions in inches because that's how most people in the US think. So, all right, now we have our chassis. Here's a completed car, and there really aren't that many parts to it. You're going to have your chassis, like we talked about before. These little plastic pieces, they're really just little 1/4-inch plastic tubes with a hole in the center, and those are called the bearings. You have an axle that goes through the bearings, that's this copper piece, wheels that attach to the axles, and then a motor, and usually a gear that will attach to the axle. Those are all the parts. So I'm going to have videos for students to show how you install each one of those as you go through the whole process, so we don't need to do that here. One rule that I make that I did not do, I just noticed I didn't do, but one rule I make in the classroom is that anytime you use a knife and then you go to put it down, always retract the blade. So no matter what, if it's on the table, the blade should be retracted, because I have had them on the edge of the table and students come by and hit them and have them come off the table. They've never embedded in someone's foot, thankfully, but it is possible. It's possible for it to cut on the way down, any of those things. So if it's not being used and handled, the blade is retracted. All right. So then the T-square is your best friend. The T-square is the most important tool in putting together a car that will actually work well. And so you want to get comfortable with it, you want to get used to using it, and then you want to make sure your students know how to use it as well. And you use the T-square, I should say, to put these bearings on. And that's the only way to get them really straight. A couple things I've noticed is in the past I'll have students who are like, oh, I want a cool car that's got stuff cut out, it's like a skinny waist in the middle or something. And that's great. The problem comes is if it's too big and you go to use your T-square, but that cutout is bigger than this side, then sometimes it'll be hard to get that to go straight. The side of this board is 100% 90 degrees. It's perfect. And so we know as long as it's lined up well. Yeah, here's a good example. So this car is a cool design. I love it. But if you were to try and use this T-square to install your bearings, you don't have enough support at the bottom here to really make sure you're at 90 degrees towards the chassis. And it makes a huge, huge difference. I cannot emphasize that enough. For the first 10 years I did this, we didn't have T-squares and our cars went all over the place. So don't recommend it. Make sure you learn how to use that well. The second T-square that you'll use is what I call kind of the teacher square, if you will. And this one is cut off a little bit and it's got this little piece of wood in here. And the reason why I like this one for the teacher, you students can use it too, but it allows you to check to see if the wheels are straight without having to take it all apart and really look at it carefully. So you put it onto the chassis. Again, this tool requires that you don't have a big cutout in the side. Doesn't work if you do. And you slide it up to both wheels. If both wheels are touching, you know your bearings are straight. If one of the wheels is not, if it looked more like this, I don't know if you can see that or not, but this wheel's touching and that wheel's not, you know that the axle was not put on, or the bearings were not put on straight. And so they're going to need to take one or both of them off and then realign them, making sure they're being careful with the T-square. The most common mistake that students make, is that when they install it, there should be no gap along the entire space here. But oftentimes they'll install it where there's this teeny little gap in here, and that makes the car turn. So really, in making sure they know to make that's all synced up. Works with the rear wheels too. This one works with the rear wheels too. Like this. So you can do the same thing on the rear wheels. You just do it on the bottom side of the car away from the motor, because the motor would get in the way. So this is a huge time saver, because somebody would say, my car's turning. And I'd say, well, are you sure you put the bearings on straight? Yeah, I'm sure. And so this was like something in 5 seconds. I could say, check it with this T-square. And they're like, oh, there's a gap there. Then you know where the problem lies. And it also tells you which axle, because sometimes only one was put on off kilter and the other one's fine. The other thing that can happen, let's say you've got a lot of friction where you go to spin the wheels and they don't spin for a long time. This one's probably going to be impossible to really see in the video, but what you're looking to do is looking straight down this hole. You should be able to see through both of them.
Bing, bing, bing. There it is.
If you can see all the way through, then you know the bearings were put on straight this way too. So they're straight this way in relation to the chassis, but there's also straight this way. So you can put the bearings on so they're kind of at a weird angle, which means now the axle has to go through this one and then rub through that, and it just makes up a ton of tension there. So that could be like this kind of, and it's not that dramatic. Obviously you couldn't put even the bearing through at all. You can go that way, but you can also go this way. So a bearing can be popped up this way or that. So there's lots of different directions that these things can get put on, in that you'll have more friction. So there's some things to check. It is really, really important that the bearings stick out from beyond the side of the chassis. If they don't, then the wheels will rub on the side of the chassis and create a lot of friction. So that is really important to do. All right, and then lastly, you crazy teacher, you, going to put these two tools into your students' hands. Yes, there is a potential for problems here. I have only had one major knife accident in all my years of teaching, and it was because somebody was screwing around, right? And that's kind of how accidents generally will happen in your classroom. And so I have a video for you on knife safety, on how to use a knife that you can show to your students. Really, really hammer home the importance of these things. So watch that video and learn how to use a knife. Hot glue gun. Many students have used a hot glue gun before, so this is not like a new tool, but it's really, really strange. I don't quite understand what it is, but there is a fascination with students on how hot the hot glue gun is. They really want to know, and so they'll put a blurb on a little bubble on the table and they'll touch it. And they want to see like just how hot it gets, or they'll like put it on their finger to see how hot it really is. I don't know why. I really don't get it, but they do. And so again, I'll make a video on that where I just kind of try to tell them like, hey, it's a hot glue gun. Yeah, it's hot and it's glue. It's got both. And then I'll talk about how the glue actually starts to glue to your finger but you've damaged the tissue, so you rip off the glue and hey, your skin comes with it too. So we'll talk about how to do that, but cold running water is your best friend. So if you don't have a sink in your room that allows for cold running water, then you're going to need to have some sort of bucket of ice water or something, because somebody's going to get it on their fingers, guaranteed, probably one per class period. So just be prepared for that. There are accidental situations. I've had accidental situations where somebody is gluing something and they get extra on the table, or they wipe off the hot glue gun on the table. Perfectly fine thing to do, but then somebody comes up and puts their hand in the glue on the table, like leans onto it. I've had that happen before. And then I've had situations where one person's holding and the other person's gluing, and they glue here and they just kind of like rub by the person's finger with the hot tip or something like that. So it happens, it's gonna happen, but they're generally pretty good. All right, so that is the basic introductory video for teachers on this stuff. Again, there's going to be a video that walks through every process of the build that's intended for students, but it works great for you. So start by going through those videos and build yourself a car. It's the best way to learn how to do it. And then you have an example to show students. All right, see you in the next one.